The crowd laughed when the auctioneer struck her, but one man did not. From the shadows at the edge of the square, the mountain man watched silent, grim, and unflinching. When the gavel rose for her final humiliation, his voice cut through the noise with a single bid. The town square stank of sweat, dust, and horse dung. By mid-morning, the sun had already baked the ground into hard clay, and each shuffle of boots kicked up another layer of fine grit that hung in the air like smoke. Folks had gathered from miles around, homesteaders in patched coats, ranchers smelling of cattle, traders looking to spend coin on flesh or muscle. The auction block, nothing more than a rough platform nailed together from pine boards, stood at the center of it all like a stage for cruelty. Children darted between skirts and wagon wheels, their laughter sharp and out of place. Men lounged with mugs of weak whiskey, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. The auctioneer, a stout fellow with a red neck and the sort of smile that never touched his eyes, strutted back and forth across the platform. He barked like a carnival caller, his voice promising bargains for anyone with silver in their pockets. Behind him, under the meager shade of the platform awning, the lots waited. Not sacks of grain, not crates of goods. People, a half dozen, and all 2 boys no older than 15, a wiry man with wrists chafed raw from rope, and one young woman. She sat with her knees drawn up, hair hanging in tangled strands across her face. Her dress, once pale blue, had been torn at the hem and dirtied from the road. Bruises marked her arms in ugly blotches. When the auctioneer yanked her to her feet, she stumbled, and the crowd's jeers rose like a tide. "Too skinny for a kitchen, but should do for company," one man called. "Company, aye." Another hooted, slapping his knee. The auctioneer grinned wider and gave her a rough shove toward the edge of the platform. She tried to pull back, eyes darting toward the mob, but his hand cracked across her cheek with a sound sharp enough to silence even the children. Her head snapped to the side. She wavered on her feet, one hand lifting to her reddening face. The silence lasted only a breath. Then the laughter came again, harder this time, meaner, feeding on her humiliation. She closed her eyes. Not because of the pain, though her cheek burned, but because if she looked at them, she would break. She had learned that already in the weeks leading to this day. Don't let them see the tears. Don't give them more to feed on. The auctioneer hooked a hand under her arm and spun her so all could get a better look. "Here she is, gentlemen. Strong enough for chores, young enough for... well, you see for yourselves. Who'll start the bidding?" A few half-hearted numbers were tossed into the air. The girl's ears roared with the sound. Each bid wasn't about her, it was about what she could be used for. Reduced, measured, priced. Her stomach nodded with the realization that wherever the hammer fell, she would belong to someone who thought nothing of her pain. And then, across the square, something shifted. At first, she thought it was only her own dizziness, the heat pressing down on her skull. But no, there was a figure at the edge of the crowd who hadn't jeered, hadn't laughed, hadn't spoken. He stood apart, tall and broad-shouldered, with a beard like tangled wire and clothes patched from years of hard wear. A rifle leaned against his shoulder as easily as if it weighed nothing. The townsfolk gave him a wide berth. No one wanted to stand too close to the mountain man. Some said he lived like a bear in the high timber, that he'd killed men before and would again if roused. His name, if he had one, wasn't spoken often, and never loudly, but his eyes were fixed on her. Unlike the others, there was no hunger in them, no mockery, no cruel gleam. Just a steady, unreadable weight. The kind of look a man gives to a storm cloud on the horizon, measuring it, considering what it might bring. She shivered under it. Not from fear, not exactly. From the strangeness of being seen. The auctioneer mistook her shiver for defiance and shoved her again. "Stand straight, girl. You're costing me coin with your sulking." He turned back to the crowd. $10. Who'll give me 10 for her? Voices rose again, some serious, some mocking. She barely heard them. Her gaze, drawn again and again against her will, flicked back to the man in the shadows. He did not move, did not speak, but something in the way he stood, silent and immovable, made her heart beat slow. For the first time that morning, she felt the faintest spark of hope, dangerous, fragile hope, that maybe, just maybe, not every man in this square had come to see her broken. The girl had hoped to remain invisible. A shadow shuffled on and off the platform without incident. But hope had never served her well, and it failed her now. When the auctioneer's call reached $10, a drunk rancher staggered forward, waving a coin pouch. His beard was thick with crumbs, his breath sour, his hands cracked from work but eager, twitching. "I'll take her," he slurred. "Ain't worth more'n that." The crowd snickered. The auctioneer frowned. "10's an insult." "She's young, sound enough." 15. He shoved her toward the edge again, jerking her chin up so all could see her face. She tried to twist away, her voice barely a whisper. "Please." That was her mistake. The whisper reached him and his red face darkened. "Don't speak, girl. You got no say." His palm cracked across her cheek once more. Harder this time. The blow staggered her sideways into the post at the edge of the platform. Her temple struck wood with a dull thud. The square erupted in laughter. A boy of 12 hooted like he'd just seen a circus trick. 2 men slapped each other's backs, and one called out, "Teach her manners, Jed. Teach her good." Her vision swam. The world tilted, then righted itself. She pressed a hand to her face, tasting blood on her lips. Every instinct screamed to fold in, curl tight, vanish. But there was nowhere to hide, no curtain to draw, no mercy to expect. She stood there, wobbling, while the auctioneer puffed and strutted like nothing had happened. 15, I said. She lasts longer than your whiskey, worth every cent. The rancher laughed, jingling his pouch. 12, then. She ain't but bones. 12? The auctioneer sneered. He turned on her, jabbing a finger into her shoulder. Hear that? Worth less'n a mule hide. If you'd smile pretty, maybe you'd bring better coin. The jab sent her stumbling forward. She caught herself on trembling legs, head bowed. The sound of their laughter pounded in her ears, as steady as a drumbeat. And through it all, from the edge of the square, that silent gaze did not waver. The mountain man hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. His hands hung loose at his sides, but tension coiled in his shoulders. He looked carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. He did not laugh, did not jeer, did not even spit in the dirt like the rest. He only watched. The girl felt that watching like a tether, invisible but real. It kept her from crumbling into the dust. She straightened, not much, only an inch, but enough to draw another scowl from the auctioneer. "You'll mind yourself." He barked, and before she could brace, his fist closed around her arm. He yanked hard enough to wrench her shoulder, spinning her back toward the crowd. The bruise on her cheek glowed hotter than fire, but she bit down on the pain. The rancher laughed again. "Don't matter what you beat into her. Jed, she break before she bends." That earned another roar of approval, the sound of men who mistook cruelty for strength. The auctioneer's lip curled. He drew back his hand, and for one terrifying moment she thought he meant to strike again. Her breath caught, eyes squeezing shut against the blow she couldn't stop, but it didn't fall. The silence that followed wasn't from mercy, it was from interruption. A voice, low and rough, carried across the square. 20. The word cracked like thunder in the sudden quiet. All heads turned. The girl opened her eyes. The mountain man had spoken. His face gave nothing away, but the effect was immediate. The rancher's grin faltered. The auctioneer blinked, momentarily thrown off his rhythm. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "He's bidding?" "Him?" The girl swayed where she stood, her knees weak. She hadn't realized until that moment that she'd been holding her breath. The mountain man said nothing else. He did not lift his chin, did not step forward. Just one word dropped into the dust, and it silenced the square more thoroughly than the auctioneer's gavel ever could. The girl touched her cheek again, the sting still hot, but for the first time since she'd been dragged onto the block, she felt something different than fear. She felt confusion, and beneath it, faint and fragile as a candle flame, hope. The auctioneer squinted against the sun, scanning the edge of the crowd as though he hadn't heard right. 20? He barked, his voice bouncing off the clapboard walls of the saloon and the blacksmith's shop. No one else spoke. The man who had offered the bid didn't move from his place in the shadow of the old oak at the edge of the square. He was taller than most, broad across the shoulders, dressed in a rough wool shirt patched at the elbows and trousers the color of river mud. His boots looked as though they had walked 100 miles of mountain trails. A battered felt hat shaded his eyes, but it could not hide the thick beard or the long hair streaked with gray. Some called him the mountain man, others the trapper. Still others whispered names they couldn't back with fact: deserter, killer, hermit. He was all and none of those things. What everyone agreed on was this: he did not belong to the town, and the town preferred it that way. The crowd shuffled back, making space between themselves and him. A few children peered around skirts and trousers wide-eyed. Men who had been laughing moments ago now shifted uneasily, as though a wolf had padded into their flock. The auctioneer forced a smile, trying to recover his rhythm. 20, eh? Well, looks like we've got ourselves a serious buyer after all. Do I hear 25? No answer. The rancher who had bid 12 scowled, puffing up his chest. Don't see why she's worth more'n a sack of beans, he muttered. But his hand stayed tucked at his belt. He didn't raise his offer. He wasn't fool enough to cross the kind of man who kept to the timber and came down only when he wanted something. The girl stood frozen on the platform, her breath shallow. The sting of the auctioneer's blows still throbbed in her cheek, but now there was something new in the air, a strange weight, thick as the mountain fog. She dared to look again at the figure under the oak. His eyes met hers. Even across the space of the square, she felt it like a hand closing gently but firmly around her. Not cruel, not mocking, measuring, the way a hunter might measure the tracks of a wounded animal, seeing the pain but also the endurance. Her knees trembled, but she did not look away. The auctioneer clapped his hands. 20 going once, going twice, sold, he declared before anyone else could muster the nerve to speak. He smacked the gavel down on the pine rail so hard a splinter flew. Sold to the gentleman at the oak. The word gentleman earned him a chuckle or two, nervous ones, quickly swallowed. The girl blinked, unsure what it meant. Sold. Again. To another man whose name she did not know. For a sum of money she could not imagine. The crowd parted like water as the mountain man began to move. He crossed the square with the steady stride of someone who had never in his life been hurried. Each step pressed the dust flat, leaving clear prints behind. He carried no pouch of coins in hand, no swagger, no grin. Just a rolled hide slung across his back and a rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm. The auctioneer cleared his throat, suddenly less sure of himself. That'll be $20, mister. The mountain man reached into his coat and drew out a leather wallet, worn thin and soft with age. He laid 2 $10 notes on the rail without a word. The auctioneer snatched them up quick, his greedy fingers trembling just slightly. Then the man turned toward the platform. The girl tensed. She wanted to step back, but there was nowhere left to go. The edge of the platform was behind her, the crowd pressing in at her sides. She lifted her chin a fraction, bracing for the rough grip. The barked order. It didn't come. The mountain man climbed. the steps with a quietness that seemed impossible for someone his size. Up close, she could see the scars across his knuckles, the faint white line trailing from the corner of his eye into his beard. His face was weathered, carved deep by sun and wind, but his eyes gray as slate were steady, unflinching. He didn't touch her. He only held her gaze for a long moment, then bent slightly at the knee, positioning himself so she could climb down on her own if she wished. The crowd watched, baffled. Men who would have dragged her down like a sack of grain now shifted uncomfortably at his silence. Slowly, with legs that barely obeyed her, she stepped toward him. Her bare feet met the rough boards of the platform edge, then found the ground beside him. The mountain man gave a single short nod. Then he turned, rifle still in the crook of his arm, and began to walk away from the square. The girl hesitated. Every eye in the town was on her, waiting to see if she would follow. For a heartbeat, she thought of running. But where? To what? Back into the wilderness with no food, no water, no shoes? Back into the arms of the auctioneer, the rancher, the mob? Her throat tightened. She glanced once more at the man beside her. He hadn't looked back to see if she followed. He simply walked, slow and steady, as though her choice was her own to make. And so, trembling but resolute, she stepped after him. The girl followed, not because she trusted him, but because every other direction led straight back into hell. The crowd parted as the mountain man strode through, his silence louder than the auctioneer's barking ever had. Then some muttered under their breath, "Fools wasting good. Coin. Should bolt before they're past this bustin' river. Bet he won't keep her long, he never keeps anyone." The mountain man didn't acknowledge them. Dust clung to his boots as he walked, and the girl, uncertain, kept a few paces behind. Her legs trembled with each step down from the platform, her bare feet raw from weeks of rough road, but she forced herself to keep up. The stairs burned on her back like Brand's dot at the edge of the square. The auctioneer, still recovering his bluster, shouted after them, "Best keep her tied, mountain man. She's a feisty one." Laughter rippled again, ugly and sharp, but it broke off when the mountain man stopped. He turned his head, just enough for his profile to catch the sunlight. His eyes, steel gray, flicked back toward the platform. Not a word left his lips, but the silence that followed was suffocating. Even the drunk rancher who'd bid 12 found sudden interest in the dust at his boots. Without speaking, the mountain man resumed walking. The girl realized as she hurried after him that he had not once touched her, not to drag, not to shove, not even to steady her when she nearly stumbled off the platform. For that alone she followed, though uncertainty coiled in her stomach. When they reached the edge of the square, near where his mule was tied, he stopped again. The animal was stocky, with a coat of mottled brown and ears flicking lazily at the flies. A bedroll and saddlebag hung from its flanks. This was not a man who meant to linger in town. He turned to face her then, really face her. She stiffened, expecting a command. Instead, he only studied her in silence. The girl shifted under his gaze, pulling her torn dress tighter across her chest. Her voice scraped out, hoarse from disuse. Why? The question surprised even her. It was barely louder than a whisper, carried off almost instantly by the hot wind that swept down from the ridge. The mountain man's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. A long moment stretched. His jaw worked once beneath the beard, as if he were chewing the word before spitting it out. Didn't like the bidding, that was all he said. 4 words, flat as river stones, her brows knit. She wanted to demand more. Who was he? What did he want? What would happen now? But her voice failed her. All she could do was search his face, looking for malice, for hunger, for the familiar signs of cruelty she had learned to read too well. She found none. Only weariness, maybe, and something she didn't yet understand. The mountain man untied the mule's reins, then crouched before her. The movement startled her. She flinched back, fists rising instinctively. But he didn't reach for her. He only set his hands beneath her knees and back, lifting her as though she weighed no more than a sack of feathers. She gasped, rigid in his arms. The crowd had followed at a distance, curious. Murmurs rippled when they saw him carry her instead of ordering her to walk. A few men laughed nervously, but it wasn't the same sharp cruelty as before. It was confusion. He ignored them. With the girl held against his chest, he turned and set her carefully onto the mule's back, steadying her only long enough to make sure she didn't slide off. His touch was brief and personal, but gentle. Then he swung the rifle into place and started walking, leading the mule by the reins. The girl sat stiffly, clinging to the saddlebag for balance, her heart pounding. She hadn't ridden in years. The movement felt foreign, unsteady. Yet beneath the strangeness was a flicker of something she couldn't name. Relief, perhaps? Or the first fragile threads of safety. Behind them, the town square slowly dissolved into noise again. The auctioneer barked about the next lot. The men laughed too loud, trying to chase away the silence the mountain man had left in his wake. But for the girl, the world had shifted. She was still afraid, still uncertain. But as the mountain man led her away from the jeers and dust, away from the block and the fists and the laughter, she realized something that stopped her breath. For the first time since she could remember, she wasn't being dragged. She was being carried. The town shrank behind them, swallowed by the haze of dust and the wavering heat rising from the earth. The girl twisted once in the saddle, daring a final glance over her shoulder. The auctioneer's platform was little more than a smudge now, the jeering voices fading into memory. Still, she swore she could feel them clinging to her skin like soot. The mountain man said nothing. He walked ahead of the mule with the same unhurried pace he'd carried through the square, as if distance meant nothing to him, as if he could walk forever. His broad back shifted with each step, muscles moving beneath the worn wool shirt. The rifle rested easy in the crook of his arm, like an extension of himself. The girl sat stiffly, hands clamped onto the saddlebag. Her whole body ached, shoulders raw, cheek throbbing, feet blistered from weeks of chains and marshes. Yet it wasn't the pain that made her tremble. It was the silence. No orders barked at her. No jeers, no hands grabbing her, shoving her. Just the crunch of boots on gravel, the creak of leather, the lazy swish of the mule's tail. The stillness unnerved her. She tried to break it once. Where are you taking me?" Her voice rasped, foreign in her own ears. The mountain man didn't turn. Away, just that. One word, swallowed by the wind. Her fingers tightened on the mule's saddlebag. Away, that could mean anything. Away to the hills. Away to another buyer. Away to a cabin where she'd be useful in ways she didn't want to imagine. The uncertainty gnawed at her. Yet, as the miles unspooled beneath them, she realized she was still breathing freer than she had in months. The road wound into scrubland, thorn bushes and juniper dotting the hillsides. The sun slid lower, smearing the horizon with orange. When the mule stumbled on loose rock, the mountain man paused, steadying the reins with a quiet patience that unsettled her more than anger might have done at dusk. He stopped. Without a word, he dropped the pack from his shoulder and unrolled a strip of canvas on the ground. He built a fire with a flint and kindling, movements practiced, precise. The girl sat rigid on the mule, waiting for his command. None came. Finally, he looked up at her. Not long, just a glance, steady and unreadable. Then he patted the ground near the fire. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation. Her throat tightened. She slid down from the mule awkwardly, her legs stiff. The earth was cool beneath her bare feet. She hesitated, expecting him to grab her, push her into the dirt. But he had already turned away, feeding twigs into the flames. When the fire caught, he unwrapped a bundle of dried venison and laid a strip across the coals. The smell of cooking meat hit her like a blow. Her stomach clenched hard enough to bring tears. She hadn't eaten more than stale bread in days. The mountain man noticed. He tore the strip in half, setting one piece on a flat stone. He nudged it toward her without looking up. Her hands hovered. Was it a trick? A test? But hunger won. She snatched the meat, biting down before it had cooled. The salt stung her lips, but the flavor filled her mouth with warmth. She ate in silence, eyes flicking to him between gulps. He chewed slower, deliberate, as if each bite was a ritual. When he finished, he laid back on his bedroll, staring into the dark sky. Stars pricked the heavens, cold and sharp. The girl sat by the fire, meat gone, hands folded tight in her lap. She waited for questions, her name, her past, her debts. None came. The only sound was the pop of sap in the firewood and the slow, steady breath of the man beside her. Her body should have been taut with fear, and part of it was. Yet another part, small, dangerous, began to ease. He hadn't struck her. He hadn't touched her except to lift her onto the mule. He hadn't demanded her service or her silence. He had only walked and fed her, and given her space to breathe out as the fire burned low and the night deepened. She curled near the warmth, exhaustion dragging her eyelids heavy. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was one she barely dared to believe. Maybe, just maybe, away did not mean worse. By dawn, they were already moving again. The girl woke to the scrape of boots and the faint hiss of dying embers. The mountain man had broken camp with quiet efficiency, bedroll lashed, fire smothered, meal packed before she'd even rubbed the grit of sleep from her eyes. He didn't wake her with a shout, didn't yank her to her feet like men in the past had. He just nodded toward the mule when he noticed her stirring. She climbed on without a word. The miles unfolded slowly, the land changing around them. Low scrub gave way to rolling hills, then to the dark green rise of the forest. Pines pressed close, their needles whispering with every shift of wind. The air grew cooler, damp with the smell of moss and river water. For the girl, it was a different kind of silence here, not the silence of fear, but of depth. The forest swallowed sound. No jeering crowds, no auctioneer's bark. Just bird song and the distant rush of water over stone. By midday, the path narrowed into a trail barely wider than the mule's hooves. Branches scratched her arms, but she didn't complain. Each step carried her farther from the memory of the block, from the hand that had struck her, from the eyes that had priced her like cattle. When the cabin finally appeared, it startled her. It was not the ruin she had imagined, a shack, perhaps, or a hunter's lean-to. No, it was sturdy, squared from rough-hewn logs, roof shingled with care. Smoke curled faintly from a stone chimney. A stack of split wood leaned against one wall, neat as any farmer's storehouse. The clearing around it was small, carved from the trees like a secret. A garden patch, overgrown but tended, edged the path. A stream whispered at the clearing's edge, its water glinting like glass in the sunlight. The mountain man stopped at the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder, then stood aside. The girl hovered. She'd been carried through thresholds before, and none had meant safety. Her fingers tightened on the mule's mane, but his eyes, steady, unreadable, did not push her. He only waited. Her legs trembled as she slid down. Bare feet met soft moss, then wooden steps. She crossed the threshold like a thief, her heart thundering. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine resin and smoke, not rot or filth. A single room stretched before her, simple but lived in. A wide hearth dominated the far wall, its stones blackened with years of use. A rough-hewn table held a wooden bowl and a knife. Furs lined one corner, stacked neatly. Against the wall, a bed frame of cedar logs supported a mattress stuffed with straw and covered. With hides, it was not comfort as she'd once dreamed of it. But it was clean. It was whole. The mountain man set his rifle in a corner and began unstrapping gear from the mule, carrying it inside without comment. He moved like a man accustomed to silence, each motion purposeful, practiced. He didn't glance at her to see where she'd gone, didn't bark instructions. He seemed to expect her to find her own place. The girl stood near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself. She was waiting for the demand, for the price of her keep, for the mask of kindness to drop. Her body ached with tension. Instead, the mountain man knelt by the hearth and coaxed the fire to life. Sparks leapt, smoke curled, and soon the warmth reached her bare toes. He set a pot on the hook above the flames, filled it with water from the stream, and dropped in dried beans from a sack. The smell filled the room. Her stomach growled. She flushed, ashamed, but he didn't react. He stirred the pot once, then leaned back on his heels. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, steady, like stone rolling down a hill. "Bed's yours tonight," her head snapped up. "What?" He met her eyes briefly. "You take it. I'll use the floor." Confusion knifed through her. She'd braced for everything but that. She stared at him, waiting for the trick, for the cruel grin, for the moment the trap would spring shut. But it didn't come. He turned back to the fire, expression unreadable. The girl's throat tightened. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't allowed herself in months. She pressed her lips together hard, swallowing them back. She wouldn't cry. Not now, but something had shifted. The cabin wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the first place she had stepped into that didn't demand her degradation. She sank onto the bench by the table, hands shaking. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt a whisper of something she thought she'd lost forever. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest shadow of it. The days settled into a rhythm, though the girl did not trust it at first. At dawn, the mountain man would rise without a word, stoke the fire, and step outside with his rifle slung over his shoulder. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a creature long accustomed to solitude. By the time he returned, the sun would be cresting the tree line and his hands full sometimes with a brace of rabbits, sometimes with nothing more than firewood. He never complained, never cursed the hunt, never spoke at all unless necessity demanded it. The girl, unused to silence, filled the space with watchfulness. She learned the creak of the floorboards, the scrape of his knife on wood, the rhythm of his boots crossing the porch. Every sound kept her taut as a bowstring. She expected the moment his patience would snap, the moment he would claim his due, but it never came. Instead, he gave her space. He showed her, without words, how to rinse beans in the stream and stir them into the pot. He left a cup of water on the table at night. When she burned her fingers lifting the kettle, he passed her a rag without scolding. These were small mercies, but for her they were mountains. On the third day, she dared to test him. While he chopped wood at the edge of the clearing, she slipped into the trees. Her heart pounded in her throat. She half expected him to drag her back by the arm, to beat her for her defiance, but when she looked over her shoulder, he hadn't moved. He swung the axe in steady rhythm, cleaving logs as if her absence were no concern of his. She walked farther, deeper, until the cabin was only a shadow behind the trees. For the first time in weeks, she breathed air that didn't stink of fear. She bent at the stream, scooped water into her hands, and splashed her face. The cold shocked her, reminding her she was still alive, but as she crouched there, alone with the water rushing past her ears, panic rose. Alone meant exposed. Alone meant no food, no fire, no protection. The forest that had seemed so peaceful a moment before now pressed against her, vast and indifferent. Her steps turned back almost against her will. When she broke through the tree line, the mountain man was still splitting wood. He glanced at her once, expression unreadable, then drove the axe down into another log. He didn't scold. He didn't ask. Relief and confusion tangled in her chest. He had let her go and let her return. That night, she found the courage to speak. They sat by the fire, beans simmering in the pot. She held the spoon awkwardly, stirring because it gave her hand something to do. Her voice came thin, uncertain. "You never asked me my name." The mountain man looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "Don't need to," she swallowed, heart hammering. "It's Anna," a nod. "Anna, then." The name sounded strange on his lips, rough, unused to speaking, but not unkind. She clung to it. She tried again. "And you?" He hesitated. His gaze flicked to the fire, its orange light painting deep lines across his face. At last he said, "Elias." She repeated it softly, as though testing the weight of it. Elias. It wasn't much. Two names traded across a fire. But for Anna, it felt like a crack opening in the stone wall between them. A crack where light might slip through. Later, as Elias rolled himself in his blanket on the floor, he said one more thing, so low she almost thought she dreamed it. "You're safe here." Her eyes burned. She turned her face into the pillow he'd given her, clutching the rough wool as if it could anchor her to this new world where safety was more than a lie. She didn't believe him, yet not fully. But as the fire crackled and the cabin walls held out the dark, she felt, for the first time in memory, the possibility that trust might not be a fool's hope. The weeks blurred into one another, each day smoothing the sharp edges of fear just a little more. Anna found herself moving with the rhythm of the cabin. Mornings at the stream, afternoons tending the garden, evenings by the fire. Her hands, once raw and trembling, grew steadier with work. She learned to snare rabbits, to mend clothes with coarse thread, to carry wood without stumbling. It wasn't ease, it was survival, but it was hers to share, not endure under orders. Elias never crowded her. He spoke little, but when he did, it was plain and without malice. "Careful with the knife. That log's too heavy. Take the bed tonight. I'll use the porch." His words never demanded more than she could give, and because he asked nothing, she began to offer. At first it was small, a question about setting traps, a laugh she hadn't meant to let slip when the mule sneezed and nearly threw him off balance. His answering grunt carried a hint of amusement, and the sound startled her more than the mule's antics. One evening, as the sun bled pink across the tree line, Anna set the table with 2 bowls of stew. Elias sat across from her, his hands rough and scarred around the wooden spoon. She studied him, the quiet strength in his shoulders, the patience in his stillness. For weeks she had seen him as a wall, something immovable. But now, for the first time, she wondered if that steadiness was not just armor but something deeper. "You don't have to sleep on the floor anymore," she said softly. Elias looked up. His expression didn't change, but his spoon paused mid-air. "I mean," Anna flushed, "the bed's big enough." I don't mean," she faltered, words tangling. He set the spoon down. "I know what you mean." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full like the air before rain. That night, Elias unrolled his blanket on the other side of the bed. He lay on top of it, still clothed, back turned respectfully. Anna lay on her side, watching the fire's glow flicker across the rafters. For the first time since childhood, she fell asleep without flinching at every creak of the night. Trust was not built in a single moment. It came like spring thaw, slow, uneven, sometimes receding. But it came. Anna found herself humming while she worked, old scraps of tunes her mother had once sung. She caught Elias watching her sometimes, not with hunger, not with possession, but with something gentler. Something like peace. One evening, when she burned her hand pulling a pot from the fire, Elias reached for her without thought. His hand closed over hers, steadying it, guiding her to the water bucket. She tensed, every muscle braced for pain, but none came. His touch was careful, deliberate, a man who knew strength and feared misusing it. Their eyes met over the steam rising from the water. Neither spoke. But something passed between them, something fragile and undeniable. Later, sitting by the fire, Anna whispered, "Why did you take me?" Elias stared into the flames for a long while. When he finally answered, his voice was low, roughened by something that sounded almost like shame, "Because I saw what they were doing. And I remembered what it feels like." Anna's breath caught. He didn't explain further, and she didn't press. But in that single confession, she understood more about him than all his silence had ever hidden. He, too, had been broken once. The cabin became their refuge. The wounds she carried on her skin, in her heart, did not vanish. They healed in layers, scar by scar, soothed by the constancy of a man who asked for nothing but company. And by the courage it took her to give it Dot in his silence, she learned to hear peace. In her presence, he relearned how to be more than a shadow in the woods, and though neither spoke the word aloud, they both felt it taking root between them, something deeper than survival. Stronger than fear. Healing. Not the kind that erased the past, but the kind that made the future possible.